Retrospectors, did you know our paid subscribers get early access to our episodes?
Yes, a whole year in advance indeed.
You can unlock 50 episodes that won't be on our free feed for a whole year right now at patreon.com/retrospectors.
Get exclusive content and support the show at patreon.com/retrospectors.
It's May 25th, 1986, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
From sea to shining sea at 3 p.m. Eastern Time today in history in 1986, America held hands. Well, sort of. A single line of human beings holding hands across the continental United States is actually almost impossible to pull off. There's some unpassable terrain there, and you would have to stop all the traffic. But, impressively, enough people took part in this charity event known as Hands Across America that they could, theoretically, have connected across the whole country, probably.
Yeah, the organisers had calculated it would take about 6 million people to form that transcontinental chain of hands. In the end, about 5 million Americans turned out, but a lot of them were bunched together in the more popular places. The organisers, we'll go into it, but the organisers had tried to arrange it so that wouldn't happen. You know, when you signed up, you would be given a place to go to. But as it got closer to the event and they realised that there weren't enough people registered, they sort of relaxed those rules, which meant that lots of people turned up in places like New York City or, you know, in Los Angeles. People would turn up, you know, obviously en masse. So you had lines and lines of people just forming parallel chains just to join in. And then you had the more remote areas on the southwestern section of the route. The issues with this had been foreseen. An editorial in the Arizona Public said that at the end of May, Phoenix, quote, was like the inside of a pizza oven. It is so hot that snakes stick to the ground. It's certainly too hot to hold hands. And indeed, on the day, temperatures in parts of the southwest exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, and several sections had to be either rerouted or shortened. These sections were sort of hastily joined together with banners and ropes, and in one particularly desperate case, 94 miles of ribbon.
Yeah. Yeah, this slightly madcap idea for Hands Across America was the brainchild of an advertising executive, Jeffrey Nightingale, who had previously collaborated with We Are the World producer Ken Cragen, and he was inspired during a New York City ballet performance of We Are the World, which is a show that I definitely would have loved to be at. Anyway, he suggested to Cragen that a symbolic chain of people stretching across state lines could be a really powerful way to spotlight hunger and issues with hunger and poverty within the US. Cragen really loved the concept and he moved forward with it, even though it wasn't entirely new. A similar effort had been attempted a full decade earlier in 1976 by Marvin J. Rosenblum, who also used the name Hands Across America. That early event had struggled without any kind of corporate backing, which was a key feature of this new fundraiser that we'll get into shortly. But that resulted in a single 10-mile human chain near Chicago, so not exactly across America. But anyway, Rosenblum's trademark expired, and Cragen later said he was unaware of the earlier project when he began organising his own. So he was at least claiming to have been responsible for something that was entirely new.
I mean, the novelty of the image is prescient, isn't it? Because it's sort of like a pre-meme this, isn't it? Like it now wouldn't be at all surprising to have a social media campaign. Everybody link hands, we'll all film it on our phones. But then, obviously, filming on your phones wasn't a thing. Spreading the word that this was going to happen had to be done through the mainstream media at great expense. So the concept of this very stark image, Americans, and they were always very careful in the publicity material to be, you know, the diverse rainbow of different, ethnicities, holding hands, man by man, woman by woman, your neighbour is your friend, America is great. It really tapped into a moment of 80s optimism, didn't it? Which We Are the World had also tapped into. But of course, We Are the World was all about raising money for Africa. And essentially, I mean, it's interesting. I was watching the promo that they put out during the Super Bowl for this, where they announced it. And it's Lily Tomlin and perhaps less advisedly now in retrospect Bill Cosby saying that essentially just that, you know, we've done raising money for Africa, now we're going to do it for America. And you can sort of think like, actually, yeah, that sell would kind of work in 1986.
Yeah, I had always assumed that it was a kind of Band-Aid, We Are the World type thing to sort of generically raise money for the poor and hungry. But as you say, it was specifically about the US. And although actually 10% of the funds raised by We Are the World, that made $80 million in the end, went to support anti-poverty poverty initiatives in the US. It was very much seen as having been an African fundraising project. And there was this feeling that it was time to do a domestic version. I think the interesting context is that in September 1985, so 6 months after the release of We Are the World and 2 months after the Live Aid concert, a host of country music stars had headlined Farm Aid, which is a live concert in the US, which raised $9 million to help American family farms who were struggling with mortgage debt. So there was this already, even as Live Aid and Band Aid and We Are the World were still in the headlines, there was still this undertone emerging of let's not forget about our own. And charities were conscious as well, just from a logistical standpoint, that Americans might be less inclined to donate to overseas aid if they weren't seen to be being attentive and active when it came to domestic problems as well. So this was a conscious decision to kind of keep that donation ball rolling and not to let there be any ill feeling creeping in from potential donors that, that charities had turned their eyes to problems overseas and weren't seeing what was going on in the US as well.
And I think that's why it was popular with big business. Coca-Cola came on board as the primary sponsor.
We'd like to teach the world to hold hands in a way that's totally different to our advertising campaign.
Yeah, right. Citibank also joined. They contributed an estimated $8 million to the campaign. The event also found its way onto McDonald's placemats as part of a promotional push, and other sponsors were encouraged to cover participation registration fees because it was also a call out to individuals, and people were donating usually between about $10 and $35 per person. The musician Prince famously funded an entire mile of the chain with $13,000 donated. But there was also controversy right from the beginning because Hands Across America had this planned route that went from Battery Park in New York to Long Beach in California, weaving its way relatively directly through Pennsylvania, Maryland, Ohio, Kentucky, and Arizona. But it left out huge parts of the country who would like to be involved and didn't necessarily want to bus to some remote and inhospitable part of the country. And so there was this kind of sense of yes, this is a chunk of America, but is it all of America that's being invited to take part in this?
Yeah, and on the route was the White House, and the Regans took part, holding hands with some carefully vetted children of their staffers who weren't going to criticise their policies towards the poor. I mean, that's sort of the thing that's kind of laying behind this sort of unspoken thing that I think we didn't do a campaign like this in Britain, but imagine a scenario where Bob Geldof had done Hands Across Britain. There would have been in that vicious critique, probably, of what the Conservative government was doing in the UK, but it's kind of unspoken in America that really the reason they're raising money for the poor is because the poor have been left behind because we're in Reagan's America and there is a complete lack of a social safety net and everything's all about doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
But because we're in Reagan's America and because it's America, it gets translated into this positive schmaltzy thing of we can all make a difference, we can all chip in and charity begins at home and we're all reaching our big hands around everyone. Rather than stepping in to do the kind of thing actually the state does in many other countries, which is make sure people aren't sleeping on the street.
This was a huge undertaking. It required vast amounts of planning at the national level, the regional level, and then the local level as well. Lots of people who worked on it compared it to organising a political campaign, because not only were they using techniques that were quite cutting edge for the time in terms of computing to assign all those who'd signed up to an area in the chain, but then they were organising the fleets of buses to take them to the right place and making sure there were facilities for them in the more remote areas. One of the reasons that so many of the southwestern routes had to be curtailed was that the organisers were worried that you'd have all these people who weren't used to 40-degree temperatures being bussed out into the middle of the Arizona desert, suffering from heat stroke, and then having to be rushed to these swamped local hospitals, which obviously was not it's not really the atmosphere that you want to conjure up, is it? So you had the fact that there was lots of organisation involved and lots of overhead costs in setting it up, as you can imagine. Even though they did have corporate sponsors, the costs were still enormous. And then you had the fact that the fundraising aspect wasn't necessarily very well thought through.
Throw some cash in a bucket, wasn't it, basically?
Yeah, you only had to pay $10. People did pay more, but the minimum amount when you signed up was $10. And that last minute decision to allow anyone to join, when they started getting cold feet that there weren't going to be enough people to fill the gaps, meant that some participants ended up donating nothing. So there was kind of this fuzziness around how are we raising the money? How is that going to balance out against the costs? And what are we doing with it?
Nearly 5 million people did take part in this event, according to calculations from the AP at the time, which is impressive. And there are quirky details like the prison thing, like the fact that Mickey and Minnie did it in the Magic Kingdom. Shamu held out a fin at SeaWorld. But the problem with it ultimately is whatever you think of the event, in the end, it cost so much to organise, between $14 and $16 million, that ate into a substantial amount of that grassroots donation that people thought they were making.
Yeah, this enormous undertaking, this huge phenomenon at the time, and still kind of a memorable moment in pop culture to this day, raised a total of $15 million, after costs had been paid from the $36 million that was raised. So way, way, way below its target, which was supposed to be between 50 and 100 million. $15 million for an event of this scale does feel like, even in 1986.
Could have just asked Prince. Instead of just doing a mile, can Prince just give us $15 million? Then the whole thing would be done.
I mean, for the people who were there, the atmosphere was undeniably festive. People had brought radios and speakers so they could tune into the nationwide broadcast coverage of the event. There were mass transcontinental sing-alongs to America the Beautiful, We Are the World, getting back in again, and Hands Across America, which was the event's official anthem, which had never quite taken off.
I tried watching it on YouTube. You can't get beyond the second chorus. You can get 3 minutes in, it's like, enough. I can't deal with this anymore. Yeah.
It had been conceived of as being this follow-up to We Are the World, and there was a music video which featured the likes of Diana Ross and Kenny Rogers holding hands with everyday Americans.
Barbara Streisand notably dancing by herself.
She's not holding ordinary Americans' hands.
A camera crew has come round to her villa and then they've gone away.
I will hold hands with me.
As you mentioned, there was this segment in the Super Bowl halftime show that was about Hands Across America, the event, and the song was supposed to debut during that slot too. But Michael Jackson insisted that the slot go to We Are the World. Now, Hands Across America anthem never quite gained momentum. It peaked at number 65, which is sort of emblematic of the whole event, really.
Now,
this episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors